I'm very excited that this is going to focus on accessing resources, which I know is such a struggle for so many families. So Paula Roberts, a social worker from here at Mayo Clinic, is going to give a talk, but we're going to start again with a caregiver sort of insight into lived experience of really struggling to access resources. And so Alan Golek is, I think, going to tell us a really compelling story about just that.
Okay, I'm going to try and see through the lights. I have one question for the caregivers. Every caregiver that has enough or adequate resources for their kids or their Dravet warrior, raise your hand. That's kind of what I thought. To give you a quick synopsis, in 2003, I was working in Northwest Arkansas for a little retail company. You might have heard of them, called Walmart. And I started my day with my daughter having her first seizure. Right from there, 6 days later, we went into our second seizure, which turned into status. That was my 34th birthday gift from my daughter. The physician came in with us. He said a prayer with us and said he was going to do all he could to keep her alive that night. Well, needless to say, she's still here, but she keeps my life very interesting. Now, from that point on, we learned out what medical travel was. And when I'm talking about traveling for medical, my closest children's hospital was 3.5 hours away from there, and that's where we started. The area that we lived in only had 3 physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics, and one of them was run by the local hospital. And in 2009, they closed that clinic. We decided as a family to make a decision to start to go look for resources for my daughter. The only solution that they could give us at that time was that she had a seizure disorder of an unknown etymology. Fast forward to 2010, we started a process of moving to California, Arizona, Texas, and in 2017, we landed into Florida. When I landed into Florida, I moved there to be closer to my mother, who was elderly and needed some assistance, and I figured I'd be there for 6 months, but I knew my daughter needed therapy, and so I had to start the process of getting an IEP, getting all the therapies that I could get for her. And in the county that I lived in, we had 3 clinics that offered PT and speech and OT, and then we had 1 standalone OT and 1 standalone speech, 1 standalone OT, 1 standalone speech. I had to start the process of asking people, and I started going through, I'm sure all of us have gotten a list of calling who's got therapy, and the dreaded question, do you take my insurance? After going through all that, everybody had said, yeah, we can get you in, and if your daughter qualifies, we'll get her therapy. And I'm like, well, can you get her in on a regular basis? Like, oh no, we have a waiting list, so what we can do for you is we'll put you on the waiting list, and then when we get a cancellation, you can come in and bring your daughter. And that's only if she qualifies. Nonverbal, cannot walk, needs full assistance. I guarantee she qualified. So the very first place I started, I made the calls. The first place I got into was the standalone OT clinic. They were able to get me in for an evaluation. And they were opening a new clinic in the next county south of me, which meant I would have to travel about 30 minutes one way to get her occupational therapy. I'll take it. When I called them, the speech clinic, one of the speech clinics said it was June. They said they couldn't even get me in for an evaluation until after the new year, so call back then. Physical therapy was just as exciting. Physical therapy says, well, we'll put you on the waiting list, and we'll call you from there. Through a series of starting OT, I'm like, let's start some therapy. My daughter was talking to the therapist, she made a recommendation for another clinic further south into another county. When I started talking to them, I called them up and they're like, we don't take pediatrics, we only take adults. So when I started talking to them, I'm like, please help me. I need to get my daughter in physical therapy. They're like, hold on a minute, we'll call you back. I called back and they says, we can get you in twice a week, 8 a.m. That's it, but we'll do a special arrangement for you. So finally, after that, I ran into another clinic, and when I was getting the OT, the insurance, I was talking to them about insurance and all the other issues and logistics of that. They finally told me, I'm like, do you get in speech therapy anywhere? And I'm like, I'm not getting any. And they're like, oh, hold on a minute. Remember that standalone clinic that doesn't have openings for an evaluation for another 6 months? Oh, that's their sister clinic. They were able to make calls and I was able to get her in for therapy. So that was what I wrote out from 2017 till 2020. And what happened in 2020, everybody? I became a PT, OT, and speech. So after all that, I did not lose contact. I had to actually leave the speech clinic because there were some trust issues about some things that were happening. But in the meantime, I never lost contact with the other clinics. I kept calling back on those lists. Finally, right after COVID, I managed to squeeze in and I was able to get physical therapy for my daughter in the county I'm living in, and speech, and I continue with the OT clinic. So it took me, I've been there 7 years. It took me 6 years to get everything within one county, and now my daughter is able to get 2 hours of PT, 2 hours of speech, and 2 hours of physical therapy every week. So the thing is one thing I have learned is no matter how much I have found out, I can not find resources for my daughter, I just have to be persistent at it.
Good afternoon. If you feel like you want to move your body, it's an invitation for you to stand and to kind of, there's been a lot, right? A lot of medical, a lot of stories of hope, and also a great deal of wonder. So sometimes our bodies can get tight and it can be intense. And so just an invitation if you want to move or if you want to take a nice deep cleansing breath, that's an invitation as well. So I'm Paula Roberts, and I'm a pediatric social worker. I like to be real informal, so standing on stage is not my typical MO. I've been a pediatric social worker for about 40 years. I have been very, very grateful for all the compassion and love folks have given to me along the way. Sometimes families say, you're like a person who's heard many stories over the years, but have been also the opportunity for me then to share with others of hope, and also for history of where are we at and how do we even get here. So some of our learning objectives, we're gonna just do a brief description about advocacy and the power of family and advocates. We're gonna do a brief kind of overview of like federal programs and state programs, and then we'll also kind of look at that transition to adulthood, which is a really big change in so many ways. So just an overview. So back many years ago, as you may know, back in the 40s, 50s, even as the 60s, if you had a child with a disability known at birth, most likely that child would not be going home with you. Most likely that child would be placed in an institution. Families tell me firsthand, they've been told by this OB doctor, don't even look at the baby because we don't want you to be bonded, and we would be taking your baby and getting care. And the baby would no longer be at home and would be raised by most often loving people in an institution. Families such as yourselves have said, no, thank you. This is not the way that we want to look at raising our child. This is our child, and we want to find a way to bring that little one home. So back from the 1950s and 60s, as you may recall, there was this strong movement of like a parent training and advocacy centers. So in Minnesota, our parent advocacy center is called PACER. So PACER and other national groups have formulated together. Government wasn't all so excited about all this. They're like, it's gonna cost way too many monies for us to figure out how we're going to get little Junior or Mohammed into school when we don't even have specialized buses, we don't have nurses to be able to take care of kiddos, or sometimes G-tube fed buckaroos, that sort of thing. How are we gonna do that? So there was a great deal of reluctance. There's a beautiful woman named Judith Heumann, who happened to be a toddler at the time of polio, and she ended up becoming disabled from her polio exposure. And she was told, no, she can't even go to school. And as a young person, she was able to press on. She took classes, she went to college. She was denied a teaching license because she had a wheelchair. And she's like, I'm hearing all of these no's in my life. In fact, the book is called Fighting for Yes. It's one of my references as well. But Judith and her family strongly understood the potential of everyone belonging. And even our Native friends have really said, everyone has a purpose within our community, and that we have to look at pressing through the normative, whatever that really means, to say we are all a sense of belonging and important in the community. So she noticed that there was something called Rule or Section 504 back in the 70s, and there was very, very strong language about inclusion, even about like accessibility into buildings. Elevators, ramps, or like when you think of walking on a sidewalk and you see the little apron and you just kind of cruise through, that wasn't a thing back in the 70s. I grew up in the 70s, and it was like, no, you'd have to get off your bike, or say someone's in a wheelchair, my neighbor friend's a girl with a wheelchair, we'd have to figure out how to get her down the step, and I'm like, so part of Section 504 was being watered down, as it were. And Judith and other disability advocates and other people with disabilities strongly opposed that and posted up. And they're the ones that the no violence, but pretty much refused to leave the government center in California until it was signed. So because of that strong movement, there were other civil rights things going on at the time too. And they're saying, disability rights are civil rights, that we ought to have these rights, and parents and advocates and people with lived experiences really spoke to government. From that Section 504, that's where the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, was born out of. So had it not been from that early on foundation of, for example, families from the 40s and 50s saying, we want our kids home, we don't feel that they should be institutionalized, to Judith and the disability rights movement, it's still an active revolution, as we know, as we have heard the families speaking today of, is there enough research to be able to have opportunities for our children to live a full, loving life? And the quality of our lives as caregivers as well is important as well. Back in the day, children who had disabilities, you only had one way of being able to get access to like medical assistance or Medicaid, which is a safety net to your insurance at your workplace. And Katie Beckett was a young girl who lived in Iowa, and she lived in a group home because of her high medical needs. She was a youngster. I went to say she's like elementary school age. And her parents were like, if we had nursing care at our house, if we could keep her Medicaid, and she could then come back home and live with us. and continue to be told, no, nope, nope, that's not going to be an option. You don't financially meet criteria. Like you and your family make too much money, you don't qualify. So Katie's mom's like, well, I'm going to write to the president. She did. And Ron Reagan's like, well, what's this letter from this family from Iowa who's wanting this youngster to be able to have access to Medicaid? So outborn that, he's like, well, it's not right for children not to be with their families. Kids should have Medicaid as a safety net to their insurance. And so the opportunity grew through what's called the Katie Beckett, or it's called TEFRA, the Tax Equity Fiscal Responsibility Act. So Ron Reagan's like, whatever is coming through next for an act that was going to go through, let's tack on this little program that would help folks with Medicaid to be eligible, not just based on your family income, but based on a child's disability and needs. So that evolved TEFRA. So you may have heard of that. I don't know how many of you have heard of TEFRA, or some states call it Katie Beckett. Yep. And of note, after 30 plus years of PACER and other advocates in Minnesota, the parent fee went away for Minnesota families for TEFRA. So if you happen to have been denied in the past or didn't feel like it was going to be cost effective because you had to kind of like have a cost share, that went away just this last August. So when we think about this active revolution, these things are still being evolving, they're still being pressed on to do right by kids and their families. So every state has a form of Medicaid. The first path might be just your family size and your income, and that's one pathway to get there. The other pathway is based on your child's disability and their differing abilities compared to peers their age, and that would get you a safety net or maybe your primary coverage for Medicaid. So it's oftentimes confusing in the US that because a child has a disability, how is it that they don't automatically get some kind of funding, like through Social Security or what we call SSI? And in our US kind of format, you have to look at your family income and assets and a child's disability to qualify for SSI. So supplemental security income. In other countries, I work with people from around the world, which is a great honor. Other countries, if you have a child with a disability, you might actually just get a monthly check to say, hey, your child has cerebral palsy, they have some functional needs, the government's just gonna send you a check and you take care of what you need from that. The US is not that way. So there may be some active revolution about those kinds of things to have more safety net too of the cost and expenses of caring for a youngster and for a family. I'm gonna just kind of stop and ask if there are any questions about that part of things. Is that permitted? I don't know. Seems like at the end everybody does, but I'm like, maybe you want to ask now and we could have a little chat. Any questions about that? We do. Hello.
Hello. I just had a question, and I know it's different for each state, so it's probably different. I'm from Texas, originally from New Mexico, but is there a way that we can, and like I said, you may not be able to help because it's different by states here, but my husband makes too much money to get any help with it when it comes to Medicaid. In New Mexico, before we moved to Texas, we were on like a medically fragile Medicaid waiver, and that helped with like hospitals, you know, all of his nursing care. Like I can't get nursing care here in Texas right now because we don't qualify for Texas or we're not in Texas right now, but I'm originally from Texas. Like, and you may cover on this in your further talks, but I do, like, I guess my question is like, is there any way or cheat in the system? That sounds bad, but like a way that we could get that Medicaid help that we really need in order to get a nurse, because primary you know, they don't cover it. You have to have Medicaid for it. And so we're paying out of pocket for like our formula, for his G button, his diapers, you know, just that kind of general question, I guess. I'm sorry.
No, it's a wonderful question. I do work with other families. And in fact, interestingly, I met a family who was from Texas. And that's when I learned that their parent fee for their Tefra for their Katie Beckett was $25 a month. So mom and dad were both physicians. Child with a disability had cerebral palsy, and they qualified for Medicaid with this pathway. And that's kind of where every state will have a version or an option for Tefra/Katie Beckett. So when I think of families from other states, even in Minnesota, right, or Midwest, right, they're like, I'm not even sure where to turn. So that's where I lead families to what's called the Parent Training and Information Center. So if you even Google up Texas Parent Training and Information Center, that will give you your regional area of your parent advocacy center, like our PACER. Now, back in the day, before the internet, I would call PACER and say, I'm working with a family from Texas. Could you give me their phone number? And they're like, you again? They're like, yes, me again. Now I have the internet, so they're probably happy that I'm not calling them all the time. But I know that there are agencies in every state that's actually mandated because of the parent movement to have a central location for families to be able to have access. So some states might call it like child health specialty clinics, or you might even check in with your local social worker at the school or at your local county to say, I have a youngster who has high medical need. There has to be some kind of pathway, like Tefra is a federal program. Every state has a choice of how they're going to run it. Some states, like Minnesota, if your child's found eligible, you automatically get that program. Other states, there's like, yes, your child qualifies, but we have a wait list. So it might be a year or two, like Iowa. Some families have been waiting a couple of years to get Tefra. So, but in Minnesota or Wisconsin, North, South Dakota, that's where I work mostly, there's not a wait list. So there ought to be some kind of version of Tefra for your state. Yeah, other families have advice or guidance for this caregiver? I'm gonna lean into that too, yeah. Oh, got a friend over here. Oh,
So
got a friend there.
This isn't Texas specific, but I will say in North Carolina, we have a CAP-C program, Community Alternatives Program, and we had the same issue. We were told by several people, you guys will qualify for Medicaid. It doesn't matter what your husband makes. Your son is legally disabled. Like your son qualifies. He has Dravet syndrome. And I actually called our local office, you know, I don't know, I'm totally
Like your
blanking right
county,
now.
maybe?
But I applied a few times for Medicaid, and we kept getting denied. I'm like, I've been told that we should qualify. I'm like, we're not looking for SSI. We just want this safety net of Medicaid. And I had people in the office telling me, sorry, you really don't qualify, so don't give up because we are on CAP-C. We did qualify. There was just one person in the office who knew that we did, and we just needed to find that person. So I just wanted to tell everybody, don't give up. It's out there.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I would second that as well. We were denied twice in our state prior to receiving a Katie Beckett waiver, and it was all because one person did not know the rules and obligations that are required for the state. So when we did appeal, we were able to find a new person and a new nurse to review our case, and were then approved.
Persistence, yeah. But so much energy from you all to have to get there too, yeah. All right, SIB shops, so kind of like shifting a little bit. So just one other thing about Tefra Medicaid. If you have work insurance as your primary coverage, Medicaid can assess your work insurance to see if it's called insurance cost effective. Like, is it good coverage? Medicaid likes that you have commercial insurance and will likely help pay for your insurance premium that you pay every month, in addition to related costs for medical travel. So like I work with youngsters that travel to Rochester or other places, Medicaid ought to have some type of reimbursement for your hotel, your meals, and travel whenever the youngster is in your vehicle with you for those appointments. So it's a small print somewhere. I probably some days spent like 90% of my day talking about accessing care because it is an important big deal, but it really adds up fast for a family's budget. So just know that there's other perks in addition to the Medicaid of durable medical equipment or possibly nursing or added services as far as like extra what we call waivered services, and that'll be a little slide in a little bit, but waiving the usual Medicaid coverage to cover other things, like handicap accessible, to your home or to the bathroom, those kinds of things. SIB shops, so kind of broadening like resources for brothers and sisters of kids with special health needs. SIB Shops has a really cool grassroots story. Was a man who had a sibling actually who had a mental health crisis and had mental health needs and was like, I think siblings are getting kind of lost in the shuffle of things. So he started a nonprofit. SIB Shops is based out of Chicago, last time I saw, but there's SIB Shops throughout the world, actually. So it's a place where brothers and sisters of kids with special health needs, and I know Dravet has a really great program as well, but no, there's some national things too. Parent caregiver support. Don't forget to nourish yourselves in healthy, loving ways. And one parent said, I have a tendency to have an empty cup often. I am a warrior. And then he said, and there are times where I find myself covering my cup. I don't want to have someone else help fill my cup because I don't feel that I should ask, or I don't feel that maybe I've been conditioned to say yes to help. But I want to do a really firm, gentle approach to say, please tend to yourselves because you are the strong foundation for you and your family and your buckaroo. So your well-being is really great to model it for your other kids too, right? To say, I am worthy of these things that may need to say, I'm gonna have to step back and say, yes, I'm gonna ask for help and support. And you're modeling for other people to do the same then. Yeah. So I've just seen families have health crises and other things that they're like, oh, now I can't be as fully present for my youngster because I just had a stroke or had a heart attack or something else, right? So tend to yourself, not catastrophic thinking, but reality. And then really look at local resources, right? So looking at, I had a family who was like, I don't know how many pancakes my church did or my synagogue did for me to be able to get money for my van, for my kiddo. Like, sometimes you have different ways of being a community, and sometimes folks are really looking to help out. So nudge to that. We kind of broadly talked a little bit about the Medicaid, how to be eligible, so the family income path and the TEFRA path. It varies by every state, but please be sure to ask those people in your circle. Sometimes school teachers of special ed kids or other kinds of folks be like, are you gonna get a group of families together? Or like we have an accessible ballpark, Miracle League, and parents are like, I learned so much by standing watching my kid play, and I, first of all, don't feel I'm alone. I feel like other people have kids with special needs, and siblings are enjoying that, but you can learn from each other as well. So just know that that's like an option. If you're in Minnesota or other states, oftentimes there's a screening tool as well to see what else you might be eligible for. So like in Minnesota, the Children's Defense Fund of Minnesota powers this bridgetobenefits.org website that anyone at any point in time, like July 1st, we're gonna have some new guidelines every year, changes. Check on that website, and see if there's other things like energy assistance. I got the 5-minute, okay. So Katie Beckett, we talked a little bit about that. Again, it's waivered services. What else might that be beyond kind of like where we're at with not just diapers and medical appointments and PT, but other kinds of resources. And that's where your Parent Training and Information Center will be your guide to say, how do you unfortunately have to make your own notes to be able to be asking. We'll use the last bit here of transition to adulthood. As your youngster approaches 17, please start looking on like our national transition to adulthood website here at Pacer. Has a really fantastic website. Our ARC, A-R-C, ARCs have a really great plethora of information on their websites about guardianship, conservatorship. SSI will change when your youngster's 18. And just because a child has a disability doesn't mean you automatically are their guardian past 18. That is a legal kind of way. Minnesota advocates have moved to say it's no longer a lifetime of a guardianship. It's got to be reviewed in 7 years. And so that young adulthood transition, some folks just need some extra help to get to that next phase of frontal lobe development and making good decisions. But so over time, laws are changing all the time. So what we talk about today, again, might look different in the future because of those continued advocacy adventures too. NORD, so raredisorders.org, also another great place. Like if you're in a state where you're like, I'm not sure anyone's giving me clear direction, they do have people online and on phone that could contact, you could give them a jingle and say, this is what I'm looking for, this is the gap I have. But also advocating bigger picture of staffing to be able to have a livable wage. And maybe you heard a lot of that last year too with advocates at our state legislators, trying to have helpers have a livable wage. Many folks that are PCAs or transition to adulthood skills workers are earning maybe $12 or $13 an hour. And it's very difficult to live on that wage. So that's where the upstream of training folks to be in the healthcare field, to care for our loved ones and for ourselves sometimes too. So big picture. All right, and a big shout out to Dravet Syndrome for bringing me here today and to share this opportunity. I'm very, very honored. Yeah. Thank you. I know we're tight on time, but I'd be entertaining questions. If folks want to catch up with me after, I could kind of like lurk over there on the table, so.
My name is Austin Watson. I'm the Family Network Coordinator for the Dravet, I'm in the middle.
Thank you.
For the Dravet Syndrome Foundation, and I want to say thank you so very much for your talk. I also want to put on my advocacy hat really quickly because there is an act going through right now, which is the Accelerating Access to Care for Kids Act that would allow a doctor to enroll in another state's Medicaid program that would allow you to travel more easily between states. It is an optional program that the doctors would be able to sign up for. So if you are interested in expanding that larger picture of Medicaid care, please look into the Accelerating Access for Kids Act that would allow for that cross-state payment through Medicaid programs.